Moral skepticism is a class of metaethical theories, all members of which entail that no one has any moral knowledge. Many moral skeptics also make the stronger, modal, claim that moral knowledge is impossible. Moral skepticism is particularly opposed to moral realism, the view that there are knowable, objective moral truths. Defenders of some form of moral skepticism include David Hume, L. Mackie, Max Stirner, Friedrich Nietzsche, Richard Joyce, Michael Ruse, Joshua Green, Richard Garner, Walter Sinnott Armstrong, and the psychologist James Flynn. Strictly speaking, Gilbert Harman argues in favor of a kind of moral relativism, not moral skepticism. However, he has influenced some contemporary moral skeptics. Forms of moral skepticism. Moral skepticism divides into three subclasses: moral error theory, epistemological moral skepticism, and non-cognitivism. All three of these theories share the same conclusions, which are: we are never justified in believing that moral claims are true, and, even more so, we never know that any moral claim is true. However, each method arrives at them by different routes. Moral error theory holds that we do not know that any moral claim is true because all moral claims are false. We have reason to believe that all moral claims are false, and so, since we are not justified in believing any claim we have reason to deny, we are not justified in believing any moral claims. Epistemological moral skepticism is a subclass of theory, the members of which include Pyrrhonian moral skepticism and dogmatic moral skepticism. All members of epistemological moral skepticism share two things in common. First, they acknowledge that we are unjustified in believing any moral claim, and second, they are agnostic on whether is true. Pyrrhonian moral skepticism holds that the reason we are unjustified in believing any moral claim is that it is irrational for us to believe either that any moral claim is true or that any moral claim is false. Thus, in addition to being agnostic on whether is true, Pyrrhonian moral skepticism denies. Dogmatic moral skepticism, on the other hand, affirms and cites truth as the reason we are unjustified in believing any moral claim. Finally, non-cognitivism holds that we can never know that any moral claim is true because moral claims are incapable of being true or false. Instead, moral claims are imperatives, expressions of emotion, or expressions of pro-attitudes. Moral error theory. Moral error theory is a position characterized by its commitment to two propositions. All moral claims are false, and we have reason to believe that all moral claims are false. The most famous moral error theorist is J. L. Mackie, who defended the metaethical view in ethics, inventing right and wrong. Mackie has been interpreted as giving two arguments for moral error theory. The first argument people attribute to Mackie, often called the argument from queerness, holds that moral claims imply motivation internalism, motivation to perform that action. Because motivation internalism is false, however, so too are all moral claims. The other argument, often attributed to Mackie, often called the argument from disagreement, maintains that any moral claim entails a correspondent reasons claim. Put another way, if killing babies is wrong is true, then everybody has a reason to not kill babies. This includes the psychopath who takes great pleasure from killing babies, and is utterly miserable when he does not have their blood on his hands. But, surely, this psychopath has every reason to kill babies, and no reason not to do so. All moral claims are thus false. Epistemological moral skepticism. All versions of epistemological moral skepticism hold that we are unjustified in believing any moral proposition. However, in contradistinction to moral error theory, epistemological moral skeptical arguments for this conclusion do not include the premise that all moral claims are false. For example, Michael Ruse gives what Richard Joyce calls an evolutionary argument for the conclusion that we are unjustified in believing any moral proposition. He argues that we have evolved to believe moral propositions because our believing the same enhances our genetic fitness. However, our believing these propositions would enhance our fitness even if they were all false. Thus, our moral beliefs are unresponsive to evidence. They are analogous to the beliefs of a paranoiac. As a paranoiac is plainly unjustified in believing his conspiracy theories, so too are we unjustified in believing moral propositions. We therefore have reason to jettison our moral beliefs. Consequences. There are two different opinions that follow from moral skepticism. Amoralism is the idea to drop morality. Hare claims there are some reasons to obey moral rules. He claims that amoralists are logically consistent, but have plenty of disadvantages in their lives. Criticisms. Criticisms of moral skepticism come primarily from moral realists. The moral realist argues that there is in fact good reason to believe that there are objective moral truths and that we are justified in holding many moral beliefs. One moral realist response to moral error theory holds that it proves too much if moral claims are false because they entail that we have reasons to do certain things regardless of our preferences. Then so too are hypothetical imperatives. This is because all hypothetical imperatives imply that we have reason to do that which will enable us to accomplish our ends, and so, like moral claims, they imply that we have reason to do something regardless of our preferences. If moral claims are false because they have this implication, then so too are hypothetical imperatives. But hypothetical imperatives are true. Thus the argument from the non-instantiation of objective prescriptivity for moral error theory fails. Roth, Schaefer, Landau and Daniel Colcutt have each outlined anti-skeptical strategies.